My name is Penelope Ward. I'm 44 years old, a retired lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force. Most of my work? Classified. But let's just say I didn't spend 2 decades pushing papers. I've flown through anti-aircraft fire, made decisions at 30,000 feet that grounded men for life or death. And once, on a mission no one will ever confirm, I intercepted a drone headed toward a convoy of American aid workers in Kandahar. I didn't miss. But none of that mattered on that Tuesday morning. I was flying from Dallas to D.C. on a domestic route. Nothing special, nothing worth remembering, except what happened 30 minutes after takeoff. I was supposed to be in 3C, business class, window seat. Clarissa, my younger sister by 8 years, booked the flight. She said she wanted to treat me to a family trip, said she missed me, said she was sorry we'd drifted apart. When I boarded, the gate agent gave me a different ticket. "Looks like there's been a change. You're in 12F now, ma'am," she said, smiling too tightly. 12F. Back of the plane, middle seat, right next to the restroom. I raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. There was no point. Clarissa was already in her seat, perfectly poised in 3C like a polished piece of coral. Hair curled, perfume strong, smile tight. I walked down the aisle. People were still settling in. No one looked twice at me. When I reached row 12, Clarissa turned around in her seat and called out, loud enough for everyone around to hear, "Oh, Pen, they moved you to the back? I guess some people just weren't meant to fly first." She smiled. Sharp, cold, the kind of smile that cut. I didn't answer. "Don't look so stiff," she said, with a little laugh. "You're not special anymore, not here." I nodded once, sat down in 12F, and placed my bag under the seat. She turned back around like nothing happened. The air smelled like airplane coffee and floral disinfectant. I closed my eyes. I remembered the sound of rotors slicing desert wind, the weight of my helmet, the radio crackling as call signs barked through static. Clarissa's voice echoed in my head. "You're not special." She used to say it when we were kids too, when I made varsity soccer, when I got the Air Force Academy letter, when Dad would talk about me at dinner. Always with a laugh, always pretending it was a joke. It never was. The plane took off. I stared out the window, watching the clouds blur past like old memories I didn't want to revisit. A man beside me scrolled on his phone. The woman on the other side sipped tomato juice. And just when the flight attendants began rolling out the beverage cart, everything changed. A low rumble vibrated the cabin. At first, I thought it was turbulence. Then the rumble grew louder, metallic, aggressive. People looked up. Overhead bins rattled slightly. Someone muttered, "Is that another plane?" I turned to the window. There it was, one F-22 Raptor. Then another, gliding alongside us like silent predators. Sleek, gray, deadly. Flying closer to a commercial aircraft than protocol ever allowed. Gasps filled the cabin. People unbuckled, stood up, phones raised. A baby started crying. "Are we being intercepted?" someone asked. Clarissa stood up in her seat, her voice louder than necessary. "Oh my God, what is happening? Is this a terrorist attack?" She looked panicked, genuinely panicked. But she wasn't looking out the window. She was looking at me, and I wasn't saying a word, because deep down, I already knew. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, steady and calm, but with an edge of something you rarely heard in civilian flights: respect. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I'd like to ask everyone to please remain seated and calm. The 2 F-22s you're seeing are not a threat. In fact," he paused, just long enough for people to hold their breath. "They are our escort. For the passengers seated in 12F, silence." Then the words that turned the cabin into something electric. "Call sign, Viper." It took a moment to register, just 3 syllables. Viper. That name hadn't been said aloud in 6 years. And yet when it came through the speakers, the air changed. The atmosphere thickened with something heavier than shock. Clarissa's head whipped around. "Viper," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. The man beside me pulled back. The woman dropped her tomato juice. I stayed still. The left F-22 adjusted altitude, just slightly, then tilted its wing. The right did the same. A wing dip. A salute. Not just to a call sign. To me. I looked out the window as they held that formation, firm and perfect. I knew those maneuvers by heart. I'd taught some of them. "Who are you?" the man beside me asked. His voice cracked a little. I didn't answer. Clarissa was still staring. Her jaw was clenched now. She sat down slowly, like she'd been hit with something invisible. Because in that moment, the lie she had built about who I was, what I'd become, how irrelevant I'd turned, collapsed in front of witnesses. No headlines, no medal pinning, just reality, spoken through jet engines and a flight captain's voice. The captain spoke again. "We are honored to be transporting Lieutenant Colonel Penelope Ward, retired USAF, known as Viper, to her fellow pilots. Thank you for your service, ma'am," someone clapped. Then another, and another. It spread through the cabin like rain on dry earth. I didn't smile, I didn't cry, I didn't do anything but nod, once. Because this wasn't glory, it was recognition, quiet, earned, undeniable, and it came exactly when I stopped expecting it. Clarissa wouldn't meet my eyes. Her hands gripped the seat in front of her. She looked like she might say something, then thought better of it. Good. Because I had no words left to give her. She'd said I wasn't special, but the sky had answered for me. I was born 6 years before Clarissa. By the time she came along, I was already climbing trees and lining up plastic soldiers by rank and division. I made forts from cardboard and saluted the mailman as if he were my commanding officer. She cried the first time I left for kindergarten. Our parents, well-meaning as they were, built our identities around contrast. Clarissa was the clever one, the sensitive one. She liked puzzles, and she excelled at mental math. I was the loud one, the physical one, the girl who came home with scraped knees and the scent of jet fuel in her dreams. They didn't say it outright, but the compliments always seemed to echo off one another. When I enlisted, my parents told everyone at church. "Our pennies serving the nation," Dad said with pride. Clarissa said nothing. Her eyes lingered too long on the photos of me in uniform. When I left for basic, she didn't come to the airport. She studied marketing, then nutrition, then something called integrative wellness. She posted pastel-colored affirmations on social media: "Nourish your soul, detox the mind, positive vibes only." Her followers grew into the thousands, then tens of thousands, then a book deal, a podcast. She became the founder of something called Living Radiantly. Meanwhile, I was in Kandahar, sleeping in bunkers and writing goodbye letters I never sent. I was coordinating extractions, managing satellite feeds, barking orders through static. There was nothing radiant about it. The first time Clarissa went viral, she sent me a link. The thumbnail showed her holding a green smoothie, glowing like she'd swallowed the sun. The caption said, "How I helped 10,000 women reclaim their energy without meds." The subtitle? "You don't need war to find your strength." I blinked. That wasn't a coincidence. When I came home on leave, she had already moved into Mom and Dad's old house and painted it cream and rose gold. She met me at the door wearing linen. "Wow," she said, squinting at my haircut. "You still go with that military vibe?" Then she hugged me in a way that made me feel like luggage. Over dinner, she introduced me to her fiancé, a man named Lyle with a haircut too perfect for a Tuesday. He asked me if it was weird being a woman in combat, and Clarissa laughed. Too hard. She said, "Penelope once flew a jet over enemy lines without permission. Almost cost her job. But hey, she saved a few dudes, right?" Then she took a sip of kombucha, like that line didn't sting. I smiled. Tight. I didn't correct her. Not that night. I thought I was above it. I thought distance made me immune. I told myself, she doesn't understand. I excused her like a patient in denial. I wore my silence like armor. But there's something corrosive about being misunderstood by the people who should know you best. At one point, Clarissa asked me to speak at her Living Radiantly retreat. A woman's journey through fear, she called it. I declined. She called me dramatic. When I earned my promotion to lieutenant colonel, she posted a story on Instagram. Proud of my sister, even though she still thinks shouting solves everything. The caption had a laughing emoji. I didn't respond. I let the silence speak for me, but I felt it, that sting under the ribs, the one you pretend isn't there. It got worse after the hearing. After Kandahar, I was pulled into an inquiry for going off protocol. I was cleared, barely. The operation was declassified, but the headline stayed. female pilot defies orders. Rogue hero or reckless? They never used my name, just she. Clarissa shared one of the articles with a caption. Courage comes in many forms, some just louder than others. I told myself she didn't mean harm, that maybe she thought she was being supportive in her own way. But every barb left a scar. Every smile came with a knife in its teeth. And yet, I didn't confront her. I flew more missions. I trained cadets. I learned to sleep with one ear open and one hand on strategy. I buried friends. I watched soldiers lose limbs, minds, marriages. And I still came home and let my sister talk over me at dinner. I thought silence was strength, but silence can become consent when it's misread long enough. The worst part? She really believed she was the better woman, the kinder one, the one who helped others. She believed my career was proof of trauma, while hers was a calling. It wasn't hate, not really, it was erasure. She didn't want me dead, she just wanted me irrelevant. Clarissa never hit me, she never screamed. She didn't need to. She made the world look away from me, until I started doing the same. And that's how it happens. That's how people disappear even when they're in the room. 1 year ago, while I was going through mandatory therapy for combat-related PTSD at Walter Reed, my father passed away, but I didn't know. Not until weeks later, when I ran into Mr. Lawson, my high school English teacher, at a coffee shop near the base. He wore a black tie and offered condolences with a confusion that twisted my stomach. Didn't expect to see you so soon after the funeral, he said gently. What funeral? I asked, my heart already sinking. He blinked. Your father's. Clarissa gave the eulogy. She said you were deployed. I wasn't. I was in Bethesda, 43 minutes from home. I tried calling her that night. She didn't answer. Later, I got a message. Just one line. You weren't that close with Dad anyway. No apology, no explanation, just that. I didn't respond. I couldn't. What do you even say to something like that? I mailed flowers to the funeral home, white lilies, no name on the card. For the first time in my life, I felt like a ghost in my own family, not forgotten, just deliberately excluded. Like I had been written out of the script. And the worst part? A small, traitorous voice inside me whispered that maybe Clarissa was right. Maybe I hadn't been a good daughter. Maybe being a soldier had made me too cold, too distant. Maybe I hadn't called enough. Maybe I hadn't come home enough. But then I remembered Dad's last message to me. It had come a week before he died. I watched you on the news. I'm proud of you. You fly like your mother used to. She died when I was 10. He never remarried. That message had sat in my inbox like a soft, folded paper airplane. I had never replied. After I found out, I went to his grave in secret. No one saw me. I wore my uniform because it felt right. I knelt, placed a coin on the headstone. A silent symbol of service, of loss, of things unsaid. And I whispered something I had never said out loud. I'm sorry I didn't know. I should have been there. I never told Clarissa I visited. I didn't want her to have that power, to turn something private into something performative. But that day, something shifted in me. Not anger, not even sadness. Just a quiet kind of knowing. Knowing that I couldn't trust her with my grief. That was the first time I started to pull away. Not loudly, not with drama, just slowly. The way you back out of a burning room. And she didn't chase after me. She never even asked where I'd gone. Clarissa could hold a room with her laughter. She could charm an entire table of strangers. But empathy? That was never her strength. She said once that emotions were inefficient. I think she saw my silence as weakness. But she never noticed that silence is what you use when words don't work anymore. Now, sitting here in this plane, seat 12F vibrating under me, I remember that silence. It's familiar, not painful, just present. Like the hum of an engine, like the air right before a storm. And I know now, whatever happens next, I won't stay silent anymore. Because the funeral I didn't attend. It wasn't just Dad's. It was the funeral of any hope I had left that Clarissa might one day understand me. It was the moment I realized that blood alone doesn't bind us. That love, real love, is a choice you make over and over again, especially when it's inconvenient. She chose to shut the door. And now I'm learning how to build a different kind of home. One where I'm not just tolerated, but seen. Maybe not by her, but maybe by myself. That's the thing about flying. When you're up that high, everything below looks smaller, quieter, less sharp. You start to see the shape of things. And I've started to see the shape of my life. It no longer includes asking for space in rooms that don't want me. It no longer includes apologizing for who I am. So if Clarissa thinks I'm no one special, that's fine. I don't need her to think I'm special. I just need to know, deep down, that I am not invisible. Not to the people who matter, not to myself. And certainly not to the pilots flying escort beside this plane right now. Clarissa hosted her company's annual gala last winter. Black ties, crystal centerpieces, a string quartet playing something soft and expensive. I found out about it the next day when a friend texted me a headline. Holistica CEO honors female entrepreneurs at DC Gala. The photo showed her standing next to a senator, glass of champagne in hand. I wasn't invited, not even told. When I asked, carefully, trying not to sound hurt, she said, "It wasn't really your kind of thing, Penny, politics and business." That should have been enough. But it wasn't. Not this time. See, Clarissa had built her brand on certified organic supplements backed by science and service. Her exact words. But I remembered one of those certifications. It looked wrong. Off. I'd written op-eds for a military publication years ago. Still knew someone on staff. Quietly, I verified the code, twice. It wasn't legitimate. I didn't go public. I didn't shout. I sent an anonymous envelope to the editor with a single line. You may want to look at Holistica's test results. The expose landed 2 weeks later. It didn't name her, but it shook her company. She pulled 3 products, canceled appearances, issued vague press statements about internal audits. And still, no call, no message. Then one morning, she showed up at my apartment. Tight ponytail, designer yoga pants, standing in my doorway like she had every right. "Was it you?" she asked. No hello, no pause. I didn't answer. She looked me up and down. "You always hated that I made something of myself. You without the uniform. You're just a sad, lonely woman with a shrink and no mission." I flinched. Not because she was right, but because she knew exactly where to strike. You think you're a hero? You think the world owes you a salute? Newsflash. Your war is over. No one's clapping anymore. Then she turned and walked away. I stood there in the hallway, door half open, light catching the scar just beneath my collarbone. She'd said it before. You're no one special. As kids, as teens, even after the medal ceremony at Langley. But this time it landed different. I didn't feel rage. I felt a hollow drop, like stepping off the side of a cliff in the dark. Was she right? Was I nobody without the flight suit? I sat at my desk and opened the drawer where I kept my logbooks, my call sign etched on the inside flap. Viper. That name meant something once. It still did. To the pilots I guided out of danger, to the ground teams I didn't leave behind. Clarissa didn't need to understand, but I did. 2 days later, her scandal reached national news. She stayed quiet, pulled ads, restructured. Still, no apology. A week after, we crossed paths at the grocery store. Her cart full of avocados and collagen powders. Mine, frozen meals and Tylenol. We locked eyes. She turned away. That night, I wrote her a letter. Didn't send it, just wrote. I never wanted to be the hero. I just didn't want to disappear. I folded the paper, slid it into a box with my old flight patch and the birthday card she gave me when I turned 30. It had glitter and a cartoon jet. She'd written, "Still faster than me, always will be." That was before the uniforms and TED Talks, before silence became our only shared language. Maybe she'll open that box someday. Or maybe she won't, but it'll be there. My truth, waiting. My sister called me out of the blue. We hadn't spoken in months, not since her last text, the one where she'd called me a walking relic in a flight suit. But this time her voice was smooth, like polished marble. "Penelope, I've got a trip to DC next week," she said. "One of our new partners is ex-military, and I thought it might help if he saw you beside me. You know, uniform and all. It'll be quick, just a 2-hour flight, my treat." It was framed like a compliment, like an olive branch wrapped in silk. But the way she said "you beside me" didn't sound like admiration. It sounded like decoration, a prop. Still, I said yes. Part of me wanted to believe she was trying. That maybe after everything, after the funeral, after the gala, after the way she'd looked at me like I was some sort of tarnished antique, we could find our way back. I didn't pack my uniform. I brought a simple jacket and a quiet book. And hope. We met at the gate. Clarissa wore a fitted cream blazer and oversized sunglasses, even though the terminal lights were dull and gray. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks as she walked. Business class, she said, handing me a boarding pass with a smirk. 12F. I glanced at it. My stomach dipped. That wasn't business class. That was near the lavatory. Is there a mistake? I asked. She blinked innocently. Oh no, you didn't want to sit next to me, right? I figured you'd enjoy the quiet. Besides. She lowered her sunglasses slightly. People in the front get noticed. You always hated that. I stood there, staring at the ticket. People shuffled past us. I felt the air grow thin, like we were already in flight. The gate agent gestured. Ma'am, we're boarding now. Clarissa turned, waving her perfect acrylic nails at me like she was ushering in a parade. Come on, don't make this dramatic. So I followed her down the jet bridge. Once on board, she glided into her seat near the front, aisle 2D. The flight attendant welcomed her by name. Champagne sparkled in a plastic flute. I walked past rows of men in suits and women in silk scarves, past the curtains, past the business section, past the pitying eyes of passengers who half glanced at my boarding pass. Row 12, window seat near the lavatory. As I shoved my bag into the overhead bin, I heard a giggle behind me. You sure you're in the right seat? Someone said. Clarissa. She'd walked back with her phone out, pretending to take a picture of the cabin. Smile, Viper, she whispered, low enough that only I could hear. Always wanted to show the world how the mighty fall. The attendant came down the aisle. Clarissa gave her a wink. Sorry, just checking in on my big sister. She's not used to flying coach. The attendant forced a smile and moved on. I sank into the seat. The vinyl was cracked. The armrest stuck. I felt the rumble of the lavatory door opening and closing behind me like a heartbeat. My fingers curled around the edges of the seatbelt. I stared out the window. This wasn't just a seat switch. This wasn't just an inconvenient ticket. This was a message. You're no one special. And it wasn't the first time she'd tried to send it. In high school, when I got my Air Force ROTC letter, she told our parents I was just running from real life. When I made lieutenant colonel, she sent a card that read, "Congratulations on being promoted to middle management of war." Every achievement had been another spotlight she tried to dim. I thought I could rise above it. I told myself the uniform gave me thicker skin, but sitting there, knees pressed against the seat in front of me, Clarissa's laugh still echoing in my head, I realized something. There was a difference between endurance and erasure. And for too long, I'd mistaken one for the other. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just exposed. There was no hiding in row 12. Every announcement came with static. Every moment dragged. Clarissa didn't come back again. She didn't need to. The damage was done. The plane taxied. My stomach stayed knotted. I thought of Kandahar, of the noise in the comms, of the moment I heard the team breathe when I broke the chain of command and cleared them for air cover. Viper, they'd said. Fast, precise, no noise. I closed my eyes. The metal around me wasn't a cockpit. It was a cage. But I would remember who I was. Because even if Clarissa thought I was nobody, there were people who knew better. And soon, the whole plane would know too. I heard it before I saw it. A sound not common at 30,000 feet. A low rumble that made the air feel heavy, like the sky was holding its breath. I looked out my tiny window, seat 12F, where Clarissa had banished me, and I saw them, 2 F-22 Raptors, flying in tight formation, flanking our commercial airliner like sentinels of steel. The entire plane gasped as passengers turned to their windows. Someone shouted, "Is this a military intercept?" Panic rippled down the aisle like lightning chasing thunder. Clarissa shot up from her aisle seat near the front. "What's going on?" she asked the flight attendant. Her voice was sharp, no longer mocking, just afraid. "Is there a threat on board? Are we being attacked?" The flight attendant's face had gone pale. She whispered something into the handset and then backed away, eyes wide. No one had answers, but I knew exactly what this was. And then the intercom clicked. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain began, his voice calm but filled with something else, respect, maybe awe. "Please remain seated. The F-22s you see are here for a special escort. This flight has been flagged for secure military recognition." Whispers buzzed. Clarissa half laughed, confused. "For who?" Then the voice continued, clear and steady. "They're here for the passenger in seat 12F. Call sign, Viper." A silence so profound followed that even the engines seemed to pause. Every eye turned toward the back, toward me. Some craned their necks. Others simply stared. Clarissa whipped around as if yanked by an invisible force. Her mouth parted but no words came out. The captain added, "Both pilots are decorated veterans. One of them has a personal debt to the call sign, Viper. A debt of life." Outside, one of the F-22s tilted its wings in a slow, reverent dip. I sat motionless, my hands rested in my lap, calm. I didn't wave, I didn't nod. I just looked straight ahead. Because my story didn't belong to this moment. It belonged to what came before, and what I had lost to get here. Clarissa made her way down the aisle, each step hesitant, like walking through memory. She crouched beside me, her face pale, her voice barely a breath. "Penelope, that's you?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to. But the part of me that had been bruised and buried for years wasn't ready to let her off the hook that quickly. I turned slowly to her. "Now you see me?" She swallowed. Her eyes shimmered. "You saved someone in the Air Force? You were flying those missions?" "I did what had to be done," I said, "and I paid for it." She sat down in the empty seat beside me, not her original seat, not first class, but here, in the back, where she had thrown me like excess luggage. Her presence now felt less like an invasion, more like surrender. "The pilot," I said quietly, "was pinned during an extraction. The sandstorm had grounded the medevac. Command wouldn't approve close air support. I disobeyed." I looked out the window again. "He was 24. His name was Kyle Booker. I got him out," Clarissa whispered. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I gave a sad laugh. "Because telling you was never the problem, Clarissa. You didn't want to see me. You needed me to be small so you could stay big." She dropped her gaze, her carefully painted nails picked at the hem of her blazer. "I'm sorry, I didn't think—" "You didn't have to," I cut in, my tone soft but firm. "You never asked." The second F-22 now dipped its wing. Clarissa's eyes welled. "Why are they doing that? It's how they honor someone," I said. "That wing dip? That's not for ego, that's for memory." Silence fell between us, but it wasn't hostile. It was heavy. Clarissa reached over and touched my hand. For a second, I almost pulled away, but something in me softened. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I really didn't." "I believe you," I said. "But ignorance isn't innocence." Clarissa nodded. For the first time in decades, she didn't have a comeback. She just sat with me. The jet escort continued beside us. The passengers had stopped murmuring. Now they were simply watching. A shared, suspended reverence. And as the sun hit the polished surface of the F-22, I saw my own reflection in the window. A woman worn by duty, forgotten by blood, remembered by sky. When we finally began our descent, the pilot came on the intercom again. "On behalf of our crew and the United States Air Force, we salute the passenger in seat 12F, Colonel Penelope Ward." The entire plane applauded. Clarissa was crying now, but me? I just breathed. Because sometimes the sky remembers even when people don't. "My name is Penelope Ward, call sign, Viper." I hadn't heard from him in months. Just a brief email last winter. "Doing better, hope you're well, ma'am." But when the F-22 dipped its wing beside our plane, I didn't need confirmation. I knew. Because that call sign painted under the cockpit wasn't just letters, it was memory. Rook 1. Back in Kandahar, the day had started like any other. Hot wind, dust in your teeth, calm static in your ears. I was operations lead for the air support unit, not supposed to fly. My job was to coordinate, to follow the chain of command. But when the call came in that a recon unit had been ambushed, cut off behind a ridge, I recognized the voice on the radio. His voice. He was 27, fresh out of weapons training, and scared. He tried to hide it under protocol, but it bled through. "Two injured. Ammo low. I don't think we'll hold, ma'am. There was no air support authorization. Not yet. A sandstorm was rolling in fast, and the brass hesitated, but I didn't. I overrode 3 safety locks, climbed into an F-16, and punched through the rising wall of grit and noise. I found them. Flares, muzzle flash, red smoke. I strafed low. The ridge was so tight I could have scraped paint. I made 2 passes, one for cover, one for clearance. On the third, I dipped my wing just enough for them to run. They got out. Rook 1 survived. But he didn't return to normal. His body healed, but something in him didn't. He spiraled, fast and quiet, like too many of us do. Nightmares, guilt, the gnawing sense that he didn't deserve to come home when others didn't. He was diagnosed with PTSD and placed on medical leave. I wasn't assigned to check on him, but I did. Quietly, not as an officer, not as a savior, just as someone who knew. He'd email me at odd hours, 2 a.m. Panic spirals, questions he couldn't ask anyone else. How do you sleep? Did you ever feel like you cheated death? Once he wrote, I bought an engagement ring, ma'am. But what woman says yes to a broken man? I told him to start small. Don't think about forever, I replied. Think about breakfast, then flowers, then music. Then maybe forever will sneak in. We kept in touch for 2 years. Then one day, silence. I assumed he moved on, and I hoped he did. So when I saw that jet out the window of the commercial flight, when the pilot called my name over the intercom, when he said, "Call sign Viper, this is for you," I didn't cry. I just looked at the Raptor and knew. It was him. He'd recovered, reinstated, promoted, now a flight lead with clearance for public escort drills. And today, by chance or grace, we were flying right past Langley AFB. He made it happen, coordinated with FAA, briefed the airline days in advance, and chose this flight, this moment, to salute me. For saving him? No, for not letting him disappear. Clarissa gripped the seat in silence, her jaw slack. The same sister who'd called me no one special now blinked at the sky like it had rewritten our family history. She turned to me, eyes wide. You saved his life. I didn't smile. I didn't grandstand. I just whispered, no. I gave him a reason not to give up. The intercom crackled again. This time, his voice, to the woman who taught me how to fight after the bullets stopped flying, this is your moment. The other passengers stared. Some applauded. Most simply watched. I didn't move, not out of pride, out of reverence. Because I remembered the kid who once said, if you hadn't flown that day, ma'am, I wouldn't have made it to 28. He made it to 31, married last summer. I'd received a photo, him in uniform, her in blue. I wasn't at the wedding, but I didn't need to be. I'd already been part of the vows. He once told me, you gave me back my life. But the truth is, his life gave me mine back too. I was unraveling back then too, doubting my own worth, losing my sense of who I was outside the cockpit, and his trust in me, his belief, reminded me I was more than a flight log, more than a mistake. Outside the window, the F-22 rolled gently, then pulled up and away. A final salute. My throat tightened. I looked at Clarissa again. This time, she didn't speak, didn't mock. She just looked at me like she was trying to understand a language she'd never bothered to learn. And maybe, for the first time, she heard me. Or maybe not. Either way, I wasn't invisible anymore. I reached into my carry-on, pulled out the old patch I always kept tucked beneath the lining, Rook 1's squadron emblem. I pressed it flat on my tray table, then leaned back into my seat. Fly safe, Lieutenant, I whispered. And I meant every syllable. The silence in the cabin wasn't just about shock. It was something deeper. It was a collective pause. Every phone, every whisper, every breath seemed to stall midair, as if time had folded in on itself. And I just sat there, seat 12F. The hum of the engines faded behind the beat of my heart. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply breathed, as if for the first time in years. I used to think I needed people to see me, to acknowledge the long nights, the deployment orders, the sacrifices. I thought maybe if someone clapped or even just looked at me with a hint of pride, I'd feel whole again. But in that moment, when two raptors dipped their wings outside my window and the captain said my call sign, I felt something else entirely. Peace. Clarissa didn't speak at first. She was 2 rows ahead, turned in her seat, staring at me like she didn't know who I was. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she never really did. She slowly walked back toward me, her heels uncertain on the plane's carpet. She knelt beside my seat, right there in the aisle, while everyone around us tried not to watch, but absolutely couldn't look away. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the low cabin noise. I looked at her, not with anger, not with pride, but with something else, forgiveness laced with mourning. Mourning the years lost between us, mourning all the words never said. I tilted my head slightly and replied, calm and steady, "Because you wouldn't have listened." Her eyes welled up, and for a second I saw her, not the polished businesswoman, not the bitter little sister, but a young girl again. One who once clung to my leg the day I left for basic training, begging me not to go. The same girl who cried under her blanket the first time our dad yelled at her. Who used to draw planes just so we'd have something in common. That Clarissa. But that girl had learned different rules as she grew. Rules about power, perception, status. She rose in a world where prestige mattered more than principle, and she thought I had lost because I stepped away from that game. Because I had chosen a different kind of battle. Clarissa cleared her throat, her voice hoarse. I thought you gave up. On yourself. On us. That you were hiding." I shook my head. "I wasn't hiding. I was healing." "Why didn't you fight back when I mocked you?" "Because I didn't need to win your war." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She stared at me, and I could see it. The 1,000 things she wanted to say, the justifications, the regrets. And maybe, for the first time, she realized silence could be heavier than shouting. It could tell the truth in ways words never could. The flight attendants tried to keep the passengers calm. A few whispered prayers. A child pointed at the jets still gliding alongside us. I watched as they peeled away, tipping their wings once more. And just like that, they were gone, vanishing into the clouds like ghosts, taking with them every shadow I had carried for years. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I didn't feel the need to prove anything. I didn't need the world to see me. I needed to see me. The captain made another announcement, something routine about preparing for descent, but I barely heard it. My mind drifted to Kandahar, to the desert winds, to the sharp scream of metal against sky. I remembered the faces of those men, alive because I broke protocol. I remembered the tribunal, the threats of demotion, the coldness of military discipline. But I also remembered that one pilot, eyes wide with panic before I told him over comms, "Follow my lead, I'll get you home." I got him home. And today, he brought me home in his own way. Clarissa touched my hand gently. I didn't know, I never thought. I squeezed her fingers once, not to say it was okay, it wasn't, but to say I heard her. And maybe that was enough for now. As we landed, people clapped. Not for me, I think, but out of relief. Still, a few eyes lingered. A nod from a man in first class. A soft smile from a teenage girl across the aisle. And while those gestures didn't define me, they meant something. But I didn't rise from my seat any taller than I had boarded the plane. I rose exactly as I was. Penelope Ward, 44, former Air Force pilot. Call sign, Viper, daughter, sister, woman who once flew into fire, and now, finally, free from needing applause to feel real. A week after the flight, I got an email. The sender was Clarissa. The subject line was empty, just blank white space, like she couldn't decide what to say. I hovered over it for a while, unsure if I even wanted to open it. Eventually, I clicked. "Penelope, I've spent the last few days trying to find the right words, and I'm not sure they exist. I don't know how to ask for forgiveness when I was never brave enough to admit I was wrong until now. The truth is, I've always been jealous of you. Not just because you wore the uniform, but because you never needed applause. You had discipline, honor. People followed you because they trusted you, not because you had a pitch deck or a platform. I hated that. I hated that Dad looked prouder when he mentioned your name than when he read about my startup in the paper. I hated that you never bragged about anything and still walked into a room with presents. I tried to shrink you so I could feel taller. And I'm sorry. For the seat. For the funeral. For pretending like you didn't matter. I'm not sure I can undo any of that, but I need you to know you are not invisible. You never were. I just refuse to see you. Clarissa, I read it 3 times. My first reaction wasn't what you might expect. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't even feel relief. What I felt was tired, not exhausted, not angry, just deeply, achingly tired. Because the truth is, I had already lived so long without needing her apology. I had gotten used to the quiet, to the way my story wasn't shared at dinner tables or award ceremonies. I had learned to carry that silence like a second skin. But still, it meant something. It meant she saw me. Whether it came too late, or whether it even mattered anymore, I'm not sure. What I do know is that I didn't reply. Not then. Instead, I took a walk. It was early morning. Fog curled low along the sidewalk like breath in the cold. I passed the corner cafe, where the barista with the silver nose ring always waved through the window. I walked past the bookstore, the one where the owner once asked if I'd be interested in running a military memoir discussion group. I kept walking until I reached the park. The bench near the duck pond was empty, so I sat. And I remembered. I remembered when Clarissa was 10, and I found her crying after a spelling bee because she had come in second. I had knelt beside her and said, "Second place isn't failure. It means you're strong enough to keep going." And I remembered when I got my pilot wings, and she didn't come to the ceremony. She said she had a final exam. I believed her. I remembered the first time she called me nobody special. The words didn't burn then, but they left a mark. We carry our wounds like folded letters, creases worn, edges yellowed. Some we open often, others we keep locked away. Hers were never mine to read. And mine. She never asked to understand. Some people online, after hearing the story, because yes, it had gone viral, said they could never forgive her. They called her cruel, vain, manipulative. And maybe some of that was true. But here's the thing. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give to others. It's a release you give to yourself. A choice not to let someone else's shadow determine the shape of your day. I didn't forgive Clarissa because she deserved it. I forgave her because I was done carrying the weight. I didn't write her back, but I did forward her email to Maddie, my niece. She was old enough to understand now. Old enough to see the gaps between people and the bridges we sometimes build too late. She replied with a heart emoji and one sentence. "You always mattered to me, Aunt Pen." That was all I needed. That evening, I pulled my old flight suit from the back of the closet. The one with the faded patch and worn seams. I didn't put it on, I just held it in my lap. The fabric still smelled faintly of jet fuel and wind. For a long time, I thought that uniform was my identity. That without it, I was just Penelope, the sister, the shadow. But maybe Penelope was enough. Maybe she always had been. And maybe that was what scared Clarissa most. Not that I was invisible, but that I had never needed to be seen to be strong. That night, I deleted the email from my inbox, but not before saving it to a folder labeled Unspoken. I didn't need to reopen it, but I wasn't ready to let it go either. Some truths aren't meant to echo, they're meant to rest, quietly, where they can do no more harm. And for the first time in a long time, I slept without dreaming. They say silence travels faster than sound. That day, it moved like lightning. When the pilot's voice crackled through the cabin and spoke my call sign, Viper. Something shifted in the air. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. Every eye was already on me. Someone 2 rows ahead turned on their phone camera. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, the red recording light glowing like an accusation or a witness. Then, outside the windows, the F-22s tipped their wings in perfect salute. Not for a general, not for a politician. For the passenger in seat 12F. For me. The man beside me, a stranger in a business suit who hadn't said a word the entire flight, looked over with a mix of confusion and awe. "Is that for you?" he whispered. I nodded once. I wasn't embarrassed. But I wasn't proud either. There's a kind of grief that never lets you feel fully victorious. I carried it in my chest like a sealed letter I'd never open. Someone gasped. Then someone else clapped. Just one clap. Tentative, then another, then a wave. People stood. They stood for me. In the cramped, recycled air cabin of a domestic flight, people actually stood and clapped as the jets disappeared into the clouds. It wasn't loud like in the movies. It wasn't theatrical. It was reverent. Hesitant at first, then building. A slow, rising acknowledgement from a group of strangers who suddenly understood that someone among them had done something that mattered. Clarissa stood too, but her hands didn't move. Her eyes were on me. Not the usual side-eye laced with disdain. Not the smirk of someone who thought she had the upper hand. It was the wide-eyed look of someone seeing fire for the first time and realizing they'd been sitting too close. When the clapping faded, people sat down. No one looked at me the same way again. By the time we landed in DC, the video had already hit 200,000 views. The passenger who filmed it uploaded it mid-air using in-flight Wi-Fi. By the time I reached the terminal, news outlets were contacting the airline. Who was the woman in seat 12F? Who was Viper? I received emails from military pages, messages from old squad mates. A major news network requested a live interview. I declined. They wanted to know my story, but they didn't understand that the most important parts of it weren't theirs to broadcast. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing. I didn't post a statement. I didn't tweet. I didn't reshare the video when it made the rounds. I let it all unfold without me. I watched from a distance, like someone reading a news headline about a stranger, except the stranger was me. People debated whether the military should have orchestrated such a display. Some called it excessive. Others called it long overdue. But none of them knew what Kandahar had cost me. None of them had stayed up at night wondering if they'd made the right call when the rules said wait. But the clock said now. None of them had carried the weight of surviving when others didn't. A month after the video went viral, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a folded sheet of paper with handwriting I recognized. You didn't need to say anything, it read. They finally saw. The world saw. But I already knew. I should have said something years ago. JM? It was from the pilot I saved. He didn't sign his name, but I remembered the initials. Jason Matthews. The same man who once told me, if you hadn't flown in that day, I'd never have met my wife. I smiled and tucked the letter into a drawer. The recognition didn't change who I was. It didn't erase the years Clarissa made me feel small. It didn't fix the silence around my father's funeral or the way my mother never asked why I missed it. But it gave me something better than apology. It gave me proof. Not for others, just for me. In the weeks that followed, people at airports stopped me. Are you Viper? They'd ask, hesitant, respectful. I'd nod. Sometimes I smiled. Sometimes I just kept walking. Fame had never been my goal. Neither was revenge. But truth? Truth was mine now. Clarissa never mentioned the video, not directly, but I noticed she stopped correcting people when they called me Colonel. She even introduced me that way once. At a networking event she dragged me to out of guilt or habit. This is my sister, Colonel Ward, she said, avoiding my eyes. For a second, I saw something in her face. Not fear, not regret. Something closer to awe. And maybe that was enough. I didn't want her to grovel. I didn't need another apology. I just wanted her to see me, really see me. The way everyone else on that plane had. The way the pilots had. The way I had finally learned to see myself. When strangers stand for you, it feels nice. When you finally stand for yourself, it feels like freedom. It came in an envelope with no return address, postmarked from a small base in Colorado. The handwriting on the front was clean, precise. Someone who had spent decades filling out forms in block letters. I knew that kind of penmanship. I had mimicked it in training, then surpassed it in reports stamped classified. The paper inside was heavy, matte, folded once. There was no official seal, no military header. Just a message, handwritten in dark blue ink, penned by someone who knew that power doesn't always wear a uniform when it speaks. It read, Viper, if you've ever doubted the worth of your decisions, if there were nights where silence echoed louder than orders, remember this. There are lives walking this earth because you disobeyed me, and I am grateful. R. McAllen. I read it 3 times before sitting down. Colonel McCallan had once stood across from me in a briefing room, jaw clenched, voice like steel, saying, "You've overridden a chain of command. You may have saved a team, but at what cost to the structure we defend?" I never forgot those words. They rang in my ears long after I turned in my wings and folded away my uniform. I respected McCallan. I feared him too. He believed in rules like they were religion. I was never his favorite. Not by merit, not by instinct. I was the thorn, the risk-taker, the kind who asked forgiveness instead of permission. He wanted me court-martialed after Kandahar. Said I was reckless. Said I set a precedent that could jeopardize command authority. I stood before him, steady in posture, but bleeding inside. I didn't speak in that room. I let my report speak for itself. A week later, he dropped the charges without explanation. And now, this. I ran my finger over the words, "I am grateful." He hadn't written, "You were right." That wasn't McCallan's style. But his admission meant more. It was the closest thing to a salute I'd ever get from him, and it was enough. That night, I left the letter on my nightstand. I didn't frame it or hide it. I let it sit where I could glance at it without ceremony. Not for ego, but as a kind of quiet balance to all the years I carried doubt like a second skin. The world had changed since Kandahar. Men like McCallan rarely wrote anything personal, let alone sent it unprompted. For him to acknowledge me, especially now, after all the noise from the viral video and the calls for interviews, it meant he'd been paying attention. Not to the spectacle, but to the silence behind it. To the part of me that never asked to be seen. I didn't tell anyone about the letter, not Clarissa, not even my therapist. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't for show. It was for me. It reminded me of who I had been before all the noise, before I let someone else's version of me become the one I feared was true. For so long, I'd questioned myself, wondered if Clarissa had been right all along, if my silence meant insignificance, if disappearing was the same as defeat. But that letter changed something, not in some dramatic, cinematic way. There was no background music, no tears, just a quiet shift inside, a restoration of weight to the parts of myself I'd tried to ignore. I sat outside that morning, coffee cooling beside me, and watched a pair of birds dive between power lines. Swift, certain, sharp in their movement. I thought of jets, of call signs, of decisions made at 2,000 feet above consequence. I thought of the men I'd helped bring home. One of them had a daughter now. He'd sent me a photo a year ago, tiny fingers gripping his thumb, no caption. He didn't need one. I understood what it meant. They're alive, because I acted, even when no one told me to. Clarissa had stopped sending emails. Her apology stood unacknowledged in my inbox, like an unopened gift I wasn't ready to accept. I didn't hate her. Not anymore. But I wasn't going to pretend she hadn't hurt me. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's simply choosing not to carry the blade by the sharp edge. Colonel McCallan's letter felt like the opposite of that blade. It was the rare kind of recognition that doesn't shout, doesn't beg to be praised. It simply is. Quiet, true, steady. I carried it in my wallet for a while, tucked behind my old military ID, which I no longer showed at airports. It made me feel grounded, not because I needed validation, but because sometimes truth needs anchoring. And that letter, it was an anchor. It told me that what I did mattered, that there were people still breathing because I stepped outside the line, and that even the man who once threatened my career had come around to see the line I crossed was the one that saved lives. Recognition doesn't always come with medals. Sometimes it comes with silence broken by a single folded sheet of paper, and a signature that once condemned you, now setting you free. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky doesn't just cry, it broods. Thick clouds hung low over the neighborhood, and the air smelled faintly of metal and wet bark. I stood in my hallway with the wooden box in my hands, the one I had carried across 9 different bases, but hadn't opened in almost 3 years. The hinges creaked, same as always. Inside, my flight badge sat exactly where I had last left it, Viper, etched in silver against a deep blue field. It glinted slightly in the dim light, coming through the kitchen window, catching the edge of a raindrop that had trickled down from the frame. I didn't reach for it. Not at first. My hands hovered for a moment, fingers twitching from habit. There had been a time when suiting up was muscle memory. Clip the badge, adjust the patch, zip the suit. Walk to the hangar like the wind itself waited for your command. That time had passed. I took the badge between my fingers and turned it slowly, feeling its weight, not physical but symbolic. It had been my shield, my proof, my story condensed into a name and 2 wings. But now it felt like a relic, not of a lost self, but of one I no longer needed to prove. I laid it down on the hallway table, next to the envelope Colonel McCallan had sent. The 2 items looked strangely at peace together. One was my identity, the other my redemption. My flight suit came next. It hung in the back of my closet, behind the winter coats and formal jackets. I hadn't touched it in months. The green was faded at the elbows, and one cuff still had a thread snag from a ladder in Kandahar. I held it to my chest for a moment, inhaled. It smelled faintly of old canvas and the kind of silence you only find above 20,000 feet. I folded it carefully, creased at the shoulders, arms tucked in, legs brought up to meet the chest, just like we were taught. It was a ritual, a discipline, a final salute. Then I placed it in the wooden box. On top, I set the Viper badge, face down. Not out of shame, but closure. This wasn't a burial. It was a return. As I closed the lid, the latch clicked into place with a soft but certain sound. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but instead, I felt a strange kind of clarity, like a cord resolving after years of suspended tension. I didn't need to wear those wings anymore to know they were mine. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. I stepped to the window and looked out. Gray, flat, unremarkable, but I knew better. The sky is never empty. It holds echoes of engines, of comms chatter, of choices, and I had flown through all of them. I remembered one night over the Pacific, moonless, horizonless, everything blacked out. My co-pilot had whispered, "You ever wonder what keeps us in the air?" I had replied without thinking, faith in the math, trust in the crew. But that wasn't the full truth. What really kept us in the air, what kept me in the air, was the decision to rise at all. To believe I had something to offer up there that mattered. I leaned against the window frame and thought of Clarissa, of the gala, of the empty chair at Dad's funeral, of her voice saying, "You're just a lonely woman with a box of memories." She wasn't entirely wrong. I was alone in that moment, but I was no longer lonely. There's a difference. Loneliness aches for acknowledgement. Aloneness holds space for peace. I had made peace, not just with her, but with the years I spent chasing a kind of approval no one was ever going to give me. Not the military, not my family, not the crowd on the internet screaming, "Hero," just because 2 jets dipped their wings. I smiled at that thought. How silly it all seemed now. The desperate need to be seen. I had been seen, in the only way that mattered. Not by headlines, but by men I'd flown with. By the commander who once doubted me and later wrote, "I am grateful." And most of all, by myself. I knew who I was, and who I wasn't. I wasn't a prop for Clarissa's career. I wasn't the sister forgotten in the photo albums. I wasn't the silence at the end of the table. I was Penelope Ward, call sign, Viper. I flew when it mattered, I spoke when it counted, and I walked away when the sky no longer needed me, but I still needed me. The box sat quietly on the shelf. Outside, the clouds began to break, just slightly. A line of blue peeked through, sharp and clean. I didn't need to fly to know what freedom felt like. I already had it. And when the time came again, if it ever came, I'd know exactly where the wings were, not in the box, but in me. It had been almost a year since the F-22 flyby, since the quiet applause in an airplane cabin, since the box with my wings was sealed shut and placed gently on a shelf. I hadn't worn the badge since. I hadn't needed to. But on a cool autumn morning, I found myself driving toward the base again. Not in uniform, not with orders. Just a visitor this time. A guest. The guard at the gate checked my ID, did a double take, and then offered a small salute. I returned it, not with my hand but with a quiet nod. I wasn't here to relive old glories. I was here for something that, in a quiet way, meant even more. Her name was Mia, 23 years old. just graduated from Air Force Academy, now in her final weeks of flight school. She had written to me through a mentorship initiative, said she'd read an article, heard rumors, something about a pilot who once flew without permission to save a downed comrade. She didn't ask if it was me. She didn't need to. We agreed to meet at the rec lounge. She wore her flight suit like it was a second skin. Nervous, eager, every bit the way I must have looked when I was her age. "Ma'am," she said, standing at attention. "I just wanted to say, you're the reason I'm here." I raised an eyebrow. "I don't think I've done anything that special." "You didn't wait for permission to save someone," she said. "That's not just special. That's why I believe in this uniform." There it was again, that need to assign value through legend. I didn't flinch this time. Instead, I smiled gently. "What matters isn't what people say about you," I said. "It's that you know why you're doing this." She nodded, a little uncertain. I could tell she was waiting for me to confirm it, that I was the woman from the story, the rebel with the steady hands, the pilot who defied orders and lived to carry the consequences. I didn't confirm anything. I simply said, "Just remember why you started. Hold on to that. Especially when people try to box you in, or tell you you're not extraordinary." Mia looked at me, then asked, "And what do you do when they tell you that?" I thought for a moment, then answered, "You smile, you sit down, and you own your space, even if it's seat 12F. Her head tilted. "Seat 12F? I looked past her, out the lounge window, where a transport jet rumbled across the tarmac, lifting slowly into the air. "There was a time," I said, "when someone thought putting me in that seat would diminish me, push me to the back, remind me I didn't matter." "And did it?" I shook my head. "No. It reminded me that where you sit doesn't determine who you are. How you stand when it counts, that's what does." Mia sat back, absorbing the words. She didn't press for more. She didn't need to. There was a kind of unspoken bond that forms between women in the military. Not just shared experiences, but shared silences, shared space. She would understand more later when the weight of the wings settled on her own shoulders. As we walked back to the front gate, she asked me something simple. "Do you miss it? Flying?" I paused. "Every day." "Then why don't you go back?" I smiled. "Because sometimes the mission changes." She didn't understand then, but she would. The next morning, I received a thank you email from her. Short, respectful. One line stood out. "When they tell me I'm no one special, I'll remember seat 12F. I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because she had understood. Fully, finally, that seat, once a symbol of being ignored, was now a reminder. That value doesn't need to be announced. It doesn't require a spotlight, a first-class ticket, or applause. It lives quietly, resolutely, in the choices we make when no one is watching. I walked through my home that evening, past the shelf where the wooden box sat, untouched. The rain tapped lightly against the windows again, like a familiar song. I made tea, sat by the fire, let the silence stretch. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something soft and whole wrap around my chest. Not recognition, not redemption, just peace. They had tried to define me by omission, by silence, by shadows. But in doing so, they had forced me to find a deeper kind of truth. I didn't need to be moved to the front of the plane to hold my worth. I didn't need applause to validate what I had done. I didn't need to explain or justify or announce. I had been the woman in seat 12F. And that was enough. There's a small airfield just outside Fairborn, Ohio. It's not on any map tourists carry. The kind of place where old pilots go to remember how it used to feel. Before the noise, before the medals, before the world tried to measure them by headlines or headlines missed. That's where I found myself one quiet afternoon. No camera crews, no salutes. Just a stretch of runway and the whistle of wind threading through rusted fences. It was here I took off for my first solo flight. I had been 19, green, determined, a little terrified. My flight instructor had stood on the ground with a radio, whispering calm into the static as I lifted off. "Easy, Viper," he'd said. "Trust the sky." It was the same sky now. Different decade, different me. A boy ran past me, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Grass stains on his knees. He stopped suddenly and pointed upward. "Look," he shouted, F22, I followed his finger. There it was, high, fast, clean. An F22 gliding through the sunset like it belonged to a brighter future. The kind of sight that used to make my chest ache from the inside out. The boy watched it fade. Then he ran off, chasing something invisible, maybe a dream. Maybe just the thrill of running. I stayed still. I didn't wave. The jet didn't tip its wings. And for the first time, that felt exactly right. Because I didn't need it to. I didn't need a salute or a shout-out or an echo from the past to remind me who I was. I stood in silence, let the moment pass. Then I turned around and walked toward my car. No uniform, no applause. Just the slow steps of a woman who had already earned her peace. There's power in not needing to be seen. There's strength in walking away without looking back. And there's healing in knowing your sky isn't behind you, it's still above you. I am Penelope Ward, call sign, Viper, and my sky, it's still open. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.